So Carson is going to be talking about styling Shiny in R Markdown with Sass and Bootstrap 4. Carson is a software engineer at RStudio, working on projects that bridge R with web technologies such as Shiny, Plotly, and R Markdown. Before joining RStudio in late 2018, Carson worked as a consultant, delivering analytical and scientific software to organizations such as the Library of Congress, NOAA, Sandia National Labs, and Plotly. Carson began consulting part-time during his PhD in statistics at Iowa State, where his work on the R package Plotly was recognized by the American Statistical Association with the 2017 Chambers Award. His book, Interactive Data Visualization with R, Plotly, and Shiny, is now available online and in print at plotly-r.com. I'll put that link in the chat. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Carson.
I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry about that. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and show you some stuff that I've been recently working on. And if you would like to view these slides now or at a later time, make a note of this link here, bit.ly/North 2020, and that's North with a capital R. Right, so today's talk is going to be two sort of brand new tools not yet available on CRAN, and sort of where we're at with these current projects. So these are two new tools that will help you style both Shiny applications and R Markdown documents. So that the first tool here is Bootstrap Lib. So this kind of provides a general toolkit for, you can think of it as sort of a general toolkit for styling HTML content that you generate from R. And then the reason for the name Bootstrap Lib is, you know, Shiny by default and R Markdown HTML document. A lot of these R packages for generating web content from R are sort of powered by this underlying Bootstrap CSS framework. And Bootstrap Lib gives us tools for customizing that CSS from R. So if you'd like to install that, you'll have to currently install that from GitHub and be on the lookout for a CRAN release in the next couple of months. And then the second tool is Thematic, which provides an interface for simplifying the theming of R plots, such as ggplot2, lattice, and base graphics. So that's also not yet on CRAN. I would consider Thematic at this point a little bit more complete than Bootstrap Lib. So feel free to check out the documentation for both of these R packages at this point to get more details about how what's in these packages. So again, I just want to throw out a warning that a lot of what I'm going to show you today is a work in progress. So don't expect to take all of what I'm going to show you today and have it sort of work out of the box or use it in production. But be on the lookout for, in the next couple of months, like this is going to be what you can expect to see sort of at the end of the summer. So if you'd like to run some of the code examples that I'll have in this slide deck, you can go to this RStudio Cloud instance, which has sort of all the necessary software for running these code examples. And if you really want to run this stuff locally, there's several experimental branches that I'm working from to show you everything here. So just be aware of that. All right, so but let's start off by talking about sort of the three main approaches that people take to styling Shiny in R Markdown. And I think most of us, including me really before I started on this project, probably fall into this first category of, you know, I'm just happy with the default look of this Shiny app. And I don't want to even bother with going down the road of providing custom styling to this Shiny app or our Markdown document. So I just want to work from this example app that I'm first going to show you an example app with some default styling. And we're going to work from this code block here where I'm going to be adding to this code block to sort of show you how to style the Shiny application. So we're going to start off real simple where just imagine that I have a navbar page from Shiny. And imagine this ellipses here, or the 3 dots, has a bunch of Shiny UI elements inside of it, like a select input, slider input, weld panel. And imagine that, I have a bunch more code that generates a result like this. So here at the top is the nav bar. So here's the title of that nav bar, and then there's sort of 2 navs here, one for the main page that you can see here, and then one to an about page. And then on this main page, I have a handful of different Shiny input widgets. And on the right-hand side, I have a tab set panel where I can flip through maybe different tables of data or look at different plots, look at different typography and other things. Right, so that's kind of the default look that we get with Shiny with those different sort of core Shiny UI elements inside of it. And let's have a quick look at how we can get some different prepackaged looks with the Shiny Themes package. So this is kind of like the next step that many people end up taking is they use this Shiny Themes package, which has been around for a handful of years, which is nice because I can just pick from about a dozen or 2 different prepackaged looks. One here is this Flatly theme. And then in the results, I get a pretty different looking application where now the nav bar, instead of like a slight light gray color, it's now this darkish blue, and I have a sort of frosted green accent color. And some of those colors kind of cascade to these different UI elements on the page. And then just to give you a feel for a couple different themes that are available to you with this Shiny Themes package. Here's the Darkly theme, where now I have a dark background color and a light foreground color, and slightly different accent colors. So it gives it more of a dark mode look. And then here's another theme, Superhero, which has a dark blue background and a light foreground color and an orange accent color. All right, so yeah, with Shiny Themes, we can pick from maybe a dozen or so prepackaged looks, but in a lot of cases, people are gonna want to provide specific fonts, colors, and styles. And sort of up until this point, really the main way that people would do this is by writing custom CSS to override sort of the default styles that come with Bootstrap CSS, which is what determines those default styles that you get with Shiny. And if you haven't yet seen Joe's recent RStudio Conf talk on this topic, I highly recommend going to this. If you don't know what Bootstrap is and you've never written a line of CSS before, I do recommend going to this talk because it'll kind of give you a more proper background of what CSS is and why this is kind of a difficult problem. But we're going to focus more on just what Bootstrap Lib provides us in being able to easily customize Bootstrap CSS using simple R functions. Right, so to start using Bootstrap Lib with Shiny, what you can do is load the Bootstrap Lib package. And then at least for right now, what you'll have to do is set this shiny option of Bootstrap lib to true. And this will kind of let Shiny know that when it goes to build your user interface and provide the Bootstrap CSS with the user interface, to use your Bootstrap lib theme when it basically goes to construct your user interface. So this is just kind of letting Shiny know, hey, I would like to use Bootstrap lib for theming or styling this application. And then anytime you want to use Bootstrap lib, you also have to call this BS theme new, which basically it's kind of like calling plot.new in base R graphics, if you're familiar with that. It's basically saying, I would like to start with a new template for theming this document. And by default, this will actually upgrade Bootstrap from version 3 to version 4, because that's what BS theme new defaults to, is Bootstrap 4. So if that means anything to you, just know that Bootstrap lib is kind of like now our recommended way for you to upgrade from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 4, because Shiny defaults to Bootstrap 3, which is basically not being really maintained anymore by the Bootstrap maintainers, and Bootstrap 4 is the latest release. So people have been asking for a way to upgrade to Bootstrap 4, and this is one way to do so. And there was lots of breakage that happened going from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 4. So for some reason, if your application is using or basically written in such a way that it's assuming Bootstrap 3 specific features, you can still, in this BS theme new, say that I want to use Bootstrap 3, and all of the sort of additional theming options that I'm going to show you work with either version. Right, so by doing this by default, we're still going to get this sort of default look that comes with Bootstrap of this, white background and dark foreground color and the blue accent color. And just like Shiny themes, we can also leverage these prepackaged themes with Bootstrap lib. But here you'll want to do so by specifying a theme via this boot swatch argument in BS theme new, because that's what these themes actually are. They're coming from this sort of add-on library to Bootstrap called boot swatch. And in the case that I'm using Bootstrap 4, that means you can leverage some of these Bootstrap 4 only themes, such as Solar, Sketchy, Minty, and there's a couple other newer themes that aren't available in Shiny themes. So here's the Solar theme, where it has this sort of dark green background and a light foreground again, and then sort of an accented green for the accent color. But really, the exciting thing about this Bootstrap lib interface is really the most exciting pieces of this is this BS theme base colors and BS theme accent colors, where with the BS theme base colors, it's basically defining a whole color scale palette for hundreds of colors based on just a background color and a foreground color. So if I look at the result here, notice how just this background and this foreground color will end up sort of giving this app a whole different look and feel based on just those two colors that I've specified for a background and a foreground. Right, so the background sort of defines the body background, this deepest shade of green that you can see in the application. But then Bootstrap lib is smart enough to know that you want the well panels background color to be somewhere in between that background color and the foreground color to make it sort of stand out from the body background. And also for the colors with the hover styles on the nav bar, it will kind of use a mixture between the background and foreground. So the main point here is that just by specifying these two colors of background and foreground, it ends up setting basically close to like 100 different colors for you based on just these two colors. Right, so that's kind of like the main entry point for determining what are sort of my base colors. And then the next step is to decide what are sort of my main theme or accent colors. So there's a handful of different accent colors that you could set. Here I'm just setting the primary one, which will end up influencing the tab set panel colors that you can see here, as well as some of the colors in the DT table for navigation to different pages of the table. It will end up affecting sort of the accent color of the slider input. It will end up impacting any action buttons that have a primary class. And then these different colors here for these different action buttons are showing you the other defaults for the other theme colors available in Bootstrap. So you could also use this theme accent colors to set those other colors for these different action buttons here, and so on and so forth. And in addition to sort of specifying these main colors, we can also change sort of the base fonts with this BS theme fonts. So here I'm just setting one main font, but you could specify a font, like a different font for the base, as well as for any code blocks. But here I'm just going to set everything to Fira code. And in addition to this setting, which kind of lets the browser know, hey, if the Fira code font is available, please use that to render any text that you see in the browser. We also have to provide the actual font files to the browser so that the browser is able to render that font. So as long as you're using a Google font, you can import those fonts this way. Oops, I didn't actually mean to click on that. But also, if you're interested in doing this sort of thing with custom fonts, I recommend going to this link here for how you can properly import font files in a local fashion. Right, so now all the text that you can see on the page here is now using this Fira code font. Right, and just zooming in on, so I'm basically just gonna, on this next slide here, zoom in on these different input widgets on this web panel here and show you how these styles would appear if I were to select different items in this select input. You'll notice that all the colors here sort of key off of just that background and foreground color, as well as the sort of border color here for this input showing that it's active is using our accent color. Same with the slider input. It's respecting the background, foreground, and accent. Same with the date input, as well as, you know, the other shiny input widgets as well. So just by setting like those three main colors essentially in the Bootstrap lib theme, you can end up impacting the defaults of all of these sort of core shiny UI functions. But one thing that is a little unsatisfactory about this is that if you have any R plots that are generated by the Shiny app, those R plots fundamentally are not going to be aware of the application style, any styling that you're doing to the HTML in the application. So you might have run into this in other places using other sort of UI frameworks where you want to give your Shiny app a different look and feel. But then any plots that are generated by the Shiny app are basically unaware of that different UI framework because the R plots fundamentally require working with a different set of tools to style the plots versus styling of the web content. But this is really the whole point of thematic, is with thematic, it makes it very easy to provide new defaults for your R plots that are based on the CSS for that are in your application. So by taking the example that we had before and simply just adding thematic Shiny before we launch the Shiny app, then this will activate thematic's auto-theming feature, which you can think of it as essentially automatically translating the CSS styles for the containing element of the plot into new R defaults for when that plot is generated. So, and the really great thing about this is this works regardless of how you actually style the Shiny app. So in this case, I'm showing you Bootstrap lib for, the convenience of sort of styling all of the HTML stuff that you see in this application. But if you wanted to use a different framework, you could do so. You can style the application however you'd like and still enable thematic's auto-theming feature, and it will pick up on the CSS styles for the plot container and use the relevant styles. So, and auto-theming also can work inside of our studio in our Markdown. I'll give a little demo of this a little later on. Although one sort of catch here is that if you want custom styling in our Markdown documents, those styles must come from a Bootstrap lib theme. So if you want auto-theming in our Markdown with custom styles, use Bootstrap lib. Right, so in this example here, going from here to here, this is enabling what I call automatic colors with thematic. And to do that, you just call thematic Shiny without any arguments. But if you want both auto colors and fonts, so if I want to sort of propagate the relevant font family, the Sphera code, into the plot as well, then what you can do is set this font equal to auto, and that will enable both the automatic colors and automatic fonts. And the reason auto fonts isn't enabled by default is it can fail in various ways, but this can work as long as R can already render the relevant font, or the font is a Google font, and thematic will actually automatically download the Google font and register it with R so that it can be used automatically. But in order to actually render the font, it uses this show text package. So make sure that that's also installed to get that working. Right, and just to kind of show off how this all can work with Bootstrap lib's real-time themer. I have this little video here. Let me expand it. So Bootstrap lib comes with this real-time theming widget, which you can see on the left-hand side here. And it provides some sort of interactive inputs for changing the background color, the foreground color, different accent colors and fonts for your Shiny app. And then in real time, you can see how those theming decisions propagate to your Shiny app. So here I'm gonna sort of start with this gray background, but change it to a darker background. And you can see that that impacts the not only the HTML, the tab set panel, but it also propagates to the R plots as well. And that's because thematic is enabled. And then I'm just showing a couple different ggplot2 examples, changing the primary color, and that will also end up influencing sequential color palettes for ggplot2. I can go in and change fonts as well and see all of those changes in real time. Right, so Bootstrap lib provides this helper function, a BS theme preview, to kind of quickly show you like a demo app with your Bootstrap lib theme and the interactive themer if you want it, to kind of help you, more quickly find a theme that you like. So use this BS theme preview if you don't already have an app that you want to use with the real-time themer. But if you already have an app that you want to use with the real-time themer, you can use this run with themer. So instead of calling run app on your application, you can run this run with themer on your application, and then it'll run your application with that interactive theming widget. All right, so now pause for a demo. Make this a bit bigger. All right, so I'll load thematic, Bootstrap lib, Shiny, and Plotly. And then I'm going to call this thematic Shiny with auto fonts. So this will enable the automatic coloring and the automatic fonts. And call this BS theme preview, which shows you an app just like the one we've been working from. And here's this interactive theming widget, which I can drag around and collapse or expand. And I want to show you this also with my R console here. Where I can go in and change the background color to a dark color and change the foreground color to a light color. And let's change the primary accent color to pink. And notice that every change that I make here, every time I make a change, the interactive theming widget is printing out R code to the R console that will that I can copy and paste and adopt into an R script to replicate those changes that were made interactively. So notice that when I first opened up this application, I didn't have this background, foreground, and accent color, but now I'm going to copy this code to where we got to this point. And now slip it into my script, but first I'll have to call BS theme new and add the base colors and accent colors. And now I can rerun my application. And now I'm starting at a point at which, I got to interactively. So that's kind of convenient that I can copy the code to replicate the interactivity of the widget. Okay, so that's the real-time theming widget. But for the rest of the script, I kind of want to focus in on thematic and how thematic can work inside of our studio, as well as inside of our Markdown. So, and you might be wondering why there's this function thematic Shiny. And so this thematic Shiny is just a convenient way to use thematic with Shiny, in the sense that this will activate thematic for the next Shiny application that's run. But once that Shiny app exits, then thematic is no longer enabled. So at this point, I could create another ggplot like this, and I get the usual ggplot2 results. So thematic isn't enabled at this point. This is just stock ggplot2 with the default theme. Now, if I call this thematic on with no arguments, similar to calling thematic shiny with no arguments, these things are more or less the same in the sense that they both enable auto coloring. But thematic on will enable thematic for basically like an indefinite time until you say to turn it off. So this will enable auto coloring for every future plot that I create. So when I call thematic on and then redo the plot, now the plot takes on new theming defaults based on my RStudio theme. So since I'm generating the plot in RStudio, thematic will set all those basically global defaults for you. So now I have this background color matching the background color of my source pane, and the text color matching sort of this text color, and then the accent color coming from this purple accent color. So just to show how this could work with a different RStudio theme, you can use this RStudio API function to change your RStudio theme. So by running this line of code, now I have more of like a charcoal background color instead of a dark background color. And now let's redraw the plot. And now I have this sort of charcoal background for the plot based on this different RStudio theme. But let me just switch back to this theme that I prefer, the Tomorrow Night Bright. So that's back to where we were before. And later in the slide deck, I'll show you a little bit more about how to work with different thematic themes. But I just want to show you that thematic can work with different global ggplot2 themes. So if you wanted to use something like theme minimal instead of theme gray, notice how, before I recreate this plot, notice how this kind of has like a theme gray look to it, where the panel background has this sort of grayish fill color, and the grid lines match the background color of the plot. Notice when I change the default theme to theme minimal and redo the plot, now I no longer have that sort of theme gray look. I now have this more minimal look where I no longer have the background for the strips for these different facets. Now the grid lines are shown sort of with the foreground color instead of a background color. And there's the fill of these squares are now matching the background color. And we could even get more minimal with, say, this theme tuft, which doesn't have any grid lines. And now, oh, this is broken, but basically the point here is that thematic will respect whatever global default you have for a complete ggplot2 theme and update just the colors that are relevant to that theme. And still respect sort of the main styling decisions of that global theme. So let's go back to the theme gray. So this is kind of what you'll get by default. And I also want to just quickly point out that thematic can also work with lattice graphics if you use lattice, and also base graphics. But with that in mind, thematic was definitely written for, like, thematic works much better with ggplot2, just kind of the way that ggplot2 is designed. it does a lot more for you in terms of like working with these complete themes and setting different defaults for color scales, which we'll get into a bit later. So although thematic works with lattice and base, it's mostly for ggplot2. And this can also work with ggplotly. So we had this static ggplot2 plot, but I can make this interactive with ggplotly, and ggplotly will still respect these new defaults for this plot that these new defaults that are being provided by thematic. And let's just quickly glance at the help page for this thematic on. So I just want to point out the function signature for this thematic on, where there's these three main color settings here of this BG, which stands for background color, FG, which stands for foreground color, and accent for the accent color. So that's why by calling thematic with no arguments, I'm enabling auto coloring. And font is set to NA, meaning that just use the default font. But I can specify real values for these if I want, instead of using theming based on my RStudio theme. I could specify that actually I want a background color of dark blue, foreground color of sky blue, an accent color of orange. Now let's redo the plot. And now I have this sort of weird looking sky blue theme. And again, with thematic on, it will basically enable thematic until you restart your R session or manually disable thematic. And one way you can do that is just to call thematic off. And now I'm back to sort of stock ggplot2 without new defaults coming in from thematic. Right, so this can also work with our Markdown, where this is using an experimental version of our Markdown, which has integration with Bootstrap lib. So if I had an HTML document and I wanted to style that document, I can use the same Bootstrap lib interface. And I think this needs a BS theme new. So if I'm in an HTML document and I want custom styling in that document, I can, at the start of my document, load up Bootstrap lib, set some base colors and an accent color, and that will make sure that sort of all the web content is styled using these colors. And then I can also enable thematic. If you're inside of an R Markdown document, there's this sort of variant on thematic on, which will make sure that thematic is just enabled for this R Markdown document and turns itself off when it exits the document. So let's knit that. So here now I have the black background color and the white foreground color and this salmon accent color for both the web content and the R plots. All right, so here's an example of basically what I just showed you with some different colors, where we set a background and a foreground and primary color with Bootstrap lib, and then enable thematic's auto theming to essentially propagate those styles to the R plots. And unfortunately, this won't really work for non-HTML output formats in our Markdown, but we can still leverage what I call custom theming in thematic, where you can, in a similar way to how we've specified a background, foreground, and accent color in Bootstrap lib, you can also provide these colors more directly inside of thematic. and then it will know to use those colors. So if you had a output format like this Tuft handout where you know the relevant background and foreground color, you can just put those directly inside of thematic. And I'm going to run out of time quickly here, but just know that you can sort of flip through the rest of this deck to get a better idea of how you can work with these different arguments of thematic on. So here I'm just, again, sort of providing a different color scale for the background, foreground, and accent for all the R plots that I generate in this slide deck. And then you can specify a font family with this font argument. And as long as it's a Google font, then that should just sort of automatically work for you. And you could see more in the documentation about the potential other setup that you might need to get this to work. You can also scale up the font sizes. And if you want to override anything particular in a theme, like say just change the color of the axis title, then you can write plot specific code like this using this theme function and adding it to your plot object like normal. And that will be a way to override thematic's defaults. So yeah, I do want to get to what thematic does for setting new defaults for color scales. So here I'm mapping a numeric variable to color. So it'll generate a sequential color palette based on essentially like the foreground and the accent color. So this color gradients going from a mixture of foreground and accent to the accent color. But you can customize sort of these defaults via this sequential argument. You can specify a mixture of the foreground, background, and accent color to generate this color scale. Or you can opt out entirely with NA. So here's the default ggplot2 color scheme if you prefer that. And it also sets new defaults for qualitative color scales. So if you have a discrete variable mapped to color, then it'll set a new default based on this Akabe Ito color scale, which is colorblind safe. But again, there's an argument where you can customize the actual color scale to inform a qualitative color scale default. So here is a color scale based on our color brewer, which is also colorblind safe. And you can also opt out with an A. So this is the normal ggplot2 default. So, and I'll just kind of skip to the summary here. So use Bootstrap lib to style HTML in Shiny and Markdown. Or if you just simply want to use Bootstrap 4 instead of Bootstrap 3, because there's lots of new stuff that comes with Bootstrap 4, this is one way to do so. And to specify custom colors and fonts, you have this BS theme base colors, BS theme accent colors, and BS theme fonts. And then if you need even more customization, you can use this like lower level BS theme add variables. And again, refer to Joe Cheng's talk, sort of gets more into how this function works, if you're interested in that. And then use thematic for easier theming of R plots. So this can work with ggplot2, ggplotly, lattice, and base R graphics. And the auto theming feature of thematic works really well in Shiny, but you can also specify the colors and fonts that you want directly to thematic. And that's all the time I have, so thank you.
Thanks, Carson. We just have a couple of questions that I think will take a couple minutes to answer. I think you may have mentioned that this is only working for HTML, but Alicia wants to know if this would break if you're rendering to PDF or slides.
Yeah, so First of all, so Bootstrap lib is specifically for HTML content. So don't expect to be able to use Bootstrap lib to style any document that isn't an HTML output. So don't expect like to be able to slip this code inside of a PDF document and get it to work. But thematic can be used inside of non-HTML output formats. So if you want to use thematic in such a scenario, you can use this thematic RMD and then specify the relevant background, foreground, and accent colors directly inside of thematic RMD. Right, so again, don't expect to use the Bootstrap lib for non-HTML, but you can get thematic working in that scenario.
Okay, just one more question from Amelia McNamara. What are some features you're thinking about for the future?
Good question. So I'm hoping we're going to sort of have the bandwidth and time to sort of the next phase of this, once we're done sort of providing the foundation that I've kind of showed you here, is to probably create another R package that is more tightly bound to Bootstrap 4, where you can think of it as like kind of like a new way to create Shiny UI. So, you know, with the Shiny package, you're used to using like slider input and select input and well panel and fluid row, all these different functions for creating UI. We would like to provide a new toolkit that's more tightly bound to Bootstrap 4, which would allow you to more easily create professional looking applications. So that's kind of next on our radar, is to provide a new UI framework.
All right, thank you. We'll pause here for until about 10 a.m. Carson, there's one more question in the chat if you're up for answering it in the chat. We'll give everybody a quick break and try to meet back at 10.
Sounds good.